Hello, everybody, and welcome to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast on True Story FM. I'm Pete Wright, and I'm here with Nikki Kinzer.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Pete Wright, over there in the squirrel shirt.
It's vintage. It's a classic.
It's vintage.
And I've had it so long, it's starting,
vintage podcast.
It's starting to wear. Like, it actually looks straight up vintage.
I see that.
Like, it's pretty.
Yeah.
If I were clever enough, I would get out my big camera and take a super high resolution picture of it as it is, and then isolate that photo and put that on another t-shirt. And it would just be a meta vintage over vintage over vintage
t-shirts.
Thing.
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
You should do that.
You know what? I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to do that. I don't even know where the gear is to do that kind of thing anymore. How are you? Feeling good?
All right, we'll let that one
good
go.
Today?
Yeah. Yes, I am. I'm feeling great.
Me too. We have a lot to talk about. Before we dig into specifics, head over to TakeControlADHD.com. You can get to know us a little bit better. You can listen to the show right there on the website or subscribe to the mailing list, and we'll send you an email each time a new episode is released. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, or Pinterest at Take Control ADHD. But if you really want to connect with us, join the ADHD Discord community. It's super easy to jump into the general community chat channel. You just visit TakeControlADHD.com/Discord, and you'll be whisked over to the general information login. If you're looking for a little more, though, particularly if this show has ever touched you or helped you understand your relationship with ADHD in a new way, we invite you to support the show directly through Patreon. Patreon is listener-supported podcasting, and with a few dollars a month, you can help guarantee that we continue to grow the show, add new features, and invest more heavily in our community. You do that by visiting patreon.com/theADHDpodcast. All of our tiers are there. You get access to the super secret channels in Discord for members only. You get access to the Placeholder podcast from yours truly. Very excited about an upcoming episode. It's really, really great. Not to mention the accountability sessions and happy hours with me and you, and coaching with Nikki, and coffee with Pete. I mean, there's a lot going on. You should go check it out. So
there's a lot.
Speaking of a lot going on, you have a thing. Do you want to do your thing, or should I do my thing?
I do. I have a thing, and I'll make it quick and easy for people to follow. So over at Take Control ADHD, I am offering the GPS membership. It is open right now. Enrollment is open. It closes on July 29th. If you happen to be listening to this podcast later and it's not anywhere near July, and maybe it's like October, do still check out the GPS membership and put yourself on the waiting list and then we'll get back to you when it opens up again. But the GPS membership is a fantastic way to come together with other ADHDers who are looking at how to put together a planning system. How do you figure out what's important? How do you know when you're going to work on things? How do you know how you're going to work on things? And so these are all things that are really difficult for ADHDers. And I've put together this membership, worked very hard on it for the last year and a half, that includes all of the education and accountability and learning how to do this with myself. And sometimes Pete Wright is going to make his
very special appearance.
From Pete Wright, yes, and give you the time to practice and put together your systems during our actual sessions, which happen to be on Mondays and Thursdays. So please check it out, and if you have questions, let us know. And I hope to see you in the next GPS enrollment phase. I think that's what it's called.
What phase are we on?
Open.
We're
I
in
don't
phase
know.
17.
Like, is that even a thing? Like open, like. It's open, it's open.
Yeah, it's open. Open enrollment. It's like
and then
insurance.
If it's not
There's open enrollment, and then the enrollment closes.
And then it's closing. And then it opens again. So that's why you want to put yourself on the wait list, because it will open again.
Can I just say something about that? This is really important to me.
Yeah.
I've been reflecting on that this morning because I've been working on some other stuff for you. The whole idea with open and closed enrollment, that community, when you join with other people who are just joining for the first time, you build, there's a certain cohesion that comes with that that's really, really special, especially in an online community, especially when we're dealing with, coming out of the pandemic and learning how to be social again. Like all of those things really matter matter. And so we take that into consideration. And we've been piloting this thing for a year. Like, we kind of get what the routines are like. And we're just really excited now to share it. So if you're concerned that, oh, they're just selling us to rush us into the thing, that's not it at all. We really are trying to be methodical, thoughtful about creating the most cohesive community that we can by doing this staged enrollment. So it'll come back again, and you can join whenever, but just know when you join, you're joining with other people who are new, and you'll have something in common. You'll both be new. You'll all be new. So that's
absolutely
the deal. Is it my turn? Can I talk about my thing?
Yeah, it's your turn.
I get so excited about Text Expander because they're back. They've been, as you've heard me talk about them before, they've been advertisers with us for the last 6 months, and they emailed me and they said, you know what, Pete? Your community has responded to Text Expander, so we want to stay with you. We want to be with you guys, for another round. And so they're back, and that is just so heartwarming to me because I believe so strongly in the power of this simple little tool. It is my favorite invisible tool in my tool chest. It is always there, running in the background, just waiting for me to type an abbreviation or a snippet in Text Expander speak. And when it sees that snippet, it goes to work, instantly expanding from just a few characters on my keyboard to words, sentences, paragraphs, entire pages of text, even code. So first, a quick reminder of how it works. You store it. You keep all of yours and if you're on a team or your family's most used emails, phrases, messages, URLs, everything in your Text Expander library. Then you expand it. Just going throughout your day, you type a few keys for the abbreviation for your most important snippets, and they expand magically in wherever you type text. And I mean wherever you type text, right? Messaging apps, docs, online, offline, everywhere. And then optionally, you can share it. If, as I said, you have family, you have a team, your whole team can have access to the shared content, reducing errors, making sure your messages are consistent, the works. It's that easy. Now, I try when I talk about Text Expander to share a new thing that I'm doing with Text Expander on a given week. And, I have some I'm very excited about, but the one that has changed my use of Text Expander most dramatically, it took me almost 10 years to learn that it even existed. And that is a magic key combination that activates Text Expander itself. Now, Nikki, go ahead, ask me. How many snippets do you have, Pete?
How many snippets do you have, Pete?
So many snippets, Nikki. I have 500 snippets in my snippet library.
Wow.
And you might ask, Pete, how do you remember all those snippets?
How do you remember 500 plus snippets?
That's the awesome thing about Text Expander, Nikki. I don't even have to because of this magical key combination. That key combination, if you're on Windows, Control right-leaning / or // Control // if you're on a Mac, Command / right-leaning /. When you hit that magical key combination, it opens a pop-up box, a search box just for Text Expander. And all you have to do is type a few letters of whatever the snippet contains, and it will be there. Then you can just hit the snippet and it expands. It goes to work. So you don't actually have to remember. I have 500 snippets. I remember a handful of them at best on any given day, the ones I use every day. And the rest of them, Command /. It is absolutely magical. And man, did I carry around some shame for being a power user of Text Expander and not knowing about that amazing tool. So you should check it out. Text Expander is available on Mac, Windows, Chrome, iPhone, iPad. And for listeners of the ADHD podcast, you can get 20% off your first year of service. Just visit takecontroladhd.com/textexpander, and you will once again be whisked over to our page on their site where you can get started. Again, if you get started now, you'll save 20% off a year subscription. The way we work is changing rapidly. Make work the way your brain works by saying more in less time and with less effort using Text Expander. Our great thanks to the Text Expander team for sponsoring the ADHD podcast. Nikki, today we are talking about, after that intro, somehow, if you haven't figured it out yet, we are talking about ADHD and over talking.
Oh God,
we're doing
that's funny.
great. So far,
We
we're
are doing
doing
awesome.
great. Where did this come from?
This came from actually our assistant over at our Discord mom, Melissa, had an idea because we're doing a theme, right? Like our theme kind of in this time in July has been sort of around ADHD symptoms, right? So last week, I can't even remember what we talked about last week. What did we talk about?
Lying with Noreen. Noreen was here.
Oh, that's right. See?
Yeah. Almost did a spit take.
All right. So, so lying was last week. And guess what's going to be next week with Ari Techman? Memory. We're going to talk about memory. Oh boy, I can't wait to talk to him about that. Because obviously mine is very poor.
All of a sudden, that means this whole engagement has to stay in the show. I could cut it out, but now I can't.
No, you can't. You can't cut this out. Yes. So Melissa's idea was, hey, another ADHD symptom is talking.
Yes.
Talking too much or talking too fast. And and so that's where it came. And we both decided, hey, that's a great idea. And I know from a coaching perspective, it certainly is something that comes up with my clients. But I did want to do a little bit of research before we talked today, because, some topics we can just talk about and I don't need an outline. I don't need to do research. We can just talk, right?
Yeah.
But this one kind of, I thought, I gotta read a little bit. I gotta kind of see what's being said about this, because it just wasn't something that I felt totally comfortable with talking with you off the cuff, right? So a lot of the information that we are going to talk to you about do come from other sources. This is not stuff that Pete and I just came up with. And we will have all of those sources in our show notes. So all of the references to the articles that I looked at and everything will be there for you guys to review. But this is the thing, Pete. In my research, the one thing I couldn't find, and this is something that I want to ask our listeners to help me with, and we'll come back to this at the end of the show too, to remind people that I need help with this, is how do you tell someone that they may be talking too much or talking too fast without offending them? Did not find that in my research. So,
let's come back to that, because I definitely have thoughts, and I want to hear I'm going to give people time to simmer on that one too.
Yes.
Especially in the chat room.
Yes.
Because, okay. So can I just say one thing about this, just as a setup for me personally?
Yes, of course.
Do you think I talk too much?
Yes.
That's amazing, because in my notes I said I don't think I do, but that's probably why we're here.
I say that to be funny and to put you off, put you off your rocker or whatever. No, I really don't think you talk too much. No, I don't.
Okay. Well, one, that's good to hear. Oh, see what happened there? Figure that out. Okay. So I don't think I do. And I think that's because I recognize it when I see it in other people. And part of that is when they say, like, if you look around the room and you can't tell who's talking too much, it's probably you. That I think actually holds up for this conversation. But my challenge is, I think, adjacent and related, which is I do talk too much in my head. When I'm in conversations with people, I'm going like crazy. And I call that, I called it on the show, I call it fireworks brain. And it's usually a sign I'm not really paying attention to what people are saying, right? Like I am paying attention to the voice in my head. And so, because mostly everything that I've been researching on overtalking absolutely directly applies to me as long as it's in my head. The social part, like the way people react to me, is a little bit different because it's related to how I am. I'm perceived as, not talking too much. I'm not talking at all because I'm not paying attention to what's being said around me. But I'm not like offending people by not shutting up. I don't think. We'll see.
No,
I'll stop talking now.
You sure you don't have anything else to say? Oh boy, this is going to be a fun show. Okay. In my coaching experience, I notice it a lot in coaching groups, right? So it's not one-on-one, because when I'm working with someone individually, that's part of the process is verbal processing. I want them to talk things out and organize the thoughts in their head and work through it with me. But I do notice in coaching groups, I get a lot of apologies. Like someone like, so for example, one of the things that we do in GPS at the very beginning is I ask everyone to share one success that they've had that week. And people will share their success, and some people are very concise about it, and some people will kind of talk a little bit more about it and, give us the reference or whatever. And then they'll apologize. And they'll say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I said too much, or I took too much time." And I see that, I think from my perspective, sometimes where I see people fall into that is there's a fear of being misunderstood.
Mhm.
And so they want to over explain, or they repeat themselves, because they want to make sure that you hear all of the details and that you really understand. But if you think about it, it makes sense that this would happen with someone with ADHD, because it's hard to know what's going to be important to the listener when you don't even know what's important. And if you think about prioritizing tasks, it's hard to prioritize what to do next when you think everything is important and everything needs to be done at the same time. It's kind of the same thing with your thoughts,
Yeah,
right? It,
100%.
it just needs to get out. One thing I want to say is that with inattentive ADHD, that is a symptom of what you might think of is hyperactivity, right? Is that people who talk a lot or talk fast can be a symptom of inattentive ADHD. That's where the little H is.
Yeah.
So that's why they changed the ADHD, ADD, because the three different types of ADHD. One is the inattentive, one is the hyperactivity, and then there's a combination of both. So you can still see that as being a symptom.
Well, that's what I was describing. Like when I talk about fireworks brain, that's
Right.
100% my experience of it. I don't have the leg twitch. I don't have, I do fidget. I fidget the hell out of things, but I don't. I find the hyperactivity is internal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Where do we go? Where do we start? There are some things that we found out in our research around what happens and why this happens. And so let's educate our listeners about this, because
Yes.
it actually, I thought it really was fascinating. Over talking. ADHDers tend to experience a mindful of constant thoughts, fireworks brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And regularly diverted by a waning focus. And then I think this is where the over talking comes, is where that impulsivity and hyperactivity, which we just explained.
Right.
In an effort to want to please people and feel included or accepted, ADHDers tend to over talk in an effort to try to keep the conversation interesting and flowing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is interesting because silence to them feels like the enemy. So they're going to fill it.
Yeah. Fill it with detail that doesn't matter. Fill it with meaningless words, filler words. Crazy, amazing, amazing. Those kinds of things.
Right.
Just to keep sound.
Right.
Going.
Right.
I wonder if that has something related to like needing to have like what happens in that experience when there is silence and you're alone. For me, I always have to have something playing in the background. I don't do well. I was
going to say,
silence.
yeah, I don't. And I wonder, again, I mean, we're not experts on this. So, but I wonder if that's why white noise also is recommended, for
podcasts,
ADHDers.
audiobooks, like
anything that have some kind of background. Like silence is really uncomfortable. It's also, when we go back to strategies around homework, I remember us talking about this and saying, if your student is studying or they're working on something and they've got the TV on, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're watching the TV, but they like to have that stimulation. So it's something to definitely think about. So you had also talked about, you talked about this at the very beginning of our live stream when you were actually talking about your other podcast with the anxiety and how you went back and looked at, or you were thinking about it and you felt a lot of like regret or
Mhm.
like, oh, I shouldn't have, whatever you were saying. So I'm curious from you, is that also can that also be applied to over talking, like in general? Like,
Yeah. You mean like saying things I regret in conversation live?
yeah. And then going back and thinking, oh gosh, I shouldn't have said that, or I did talk too much, or I maybe said something inappropriate or,
This is the oversharing model, right? Like
Mhm.
this is when you say things for some reason, your mouth isn't stopping or your mouth is ahead of your brain, and you start saying things that maybe you shouldn't say because you are divulging something that's inappropriate about yourself or about other people or about, the workplace or about something you did, something body, something. I just used the word body. I don't think I've said body in 15 years. Anyhow, so you're saying something over and over, and part of that is just not being able to get ahead of your thoughts. And I definitely have experienced it. And um, part of part of why I think I have a better handle on it is because I became a full-time podcaster and I'm talking all day long. So by the time I get into social situations, I'm sort of tired.
right,
so,
right.
so I don't socialize that much as much anymore. And
Yeah.
so, yeah. Um, I wonder. I wonder about that because I know those kinds of things are, that plays into anxiety too. Like,
Oh, for sure.
same with
Because I can tell
regrets.
you from that angle, for sure, there are many conversations that I've had where I sit back and I think about it and like, oh man,
Yeah.
it could have gone a different way. It should have gone a different way. And that's where the RSD comes into, I think, for people, right? Is feeling um that sensitivity of not knowing what other people are thinking, because I think that kind of is the root of a lot of it too, is that there's this fear again of, are you being understood, are you connecting with this person, do they like what you're saying,
Hmm.
and like you said, you've got this fireworks brain and you want to connect with this person, and how do you connect with other people? You relate to them in some way, so then you want to talk about all of those things. It certainly makes sense.
The
Um,
challenge is that you want to talk about all those things at once.
right, right. So I want you, Pete, to talk a little bit about the science behind all of this, because I can't pronounce these words. So I saw this in our outline and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, Pete's going to talk about these big words.
Well, okay. Let's see if we can muddle through it. Um,
Okay.
the thalamus is the area of the brain that controls response inhibition, right? That is the thing, the gate that is sending these signals that allow or stop your behaviors, like your mouth. And
So your gate
so
is open.
your gate is open all the time, right? It's
Okay.
just wide open.
Yeah.
So the brain then detects a red flag, right? Oh my gosh, something's about to be said or done that you need to respond to. It is the limbic hippocampal connection. Limbic hippocampal. Get
Limbic
every bite of that connections.
hippocampal.
The limbic hippocampal connections relay this warning from the thalamus to the frontal cortex, which is the control center, right, and of the brain that handles emotional expression and problem solving and that kind of social
Executive
interaction,
functions.
executive functioning, right?
Yeah, that's where the
Right.
executive
So you
functions
can
come in.
see, like I use that all the time. My wife and I'll have an experience with somebody out in the world, and we both look at each other and said, "Missing a frontal cortex." Like you can just you notice,
Right, right.
that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
in ADHD brains, the thalamus gate is broken. So everything gets to
Open.
flow through it all the time because it doesn't open or close. It's just
Right.
open. It's just broken on the hinges, and it becomes this sort of uninhibited, unchecked flow of whatever the brain has, whether there are red flags or not.
So I remember, especially in my 20s, we had this friend of ours who was very upfront, and we would sometimes say, yeah, he just doesn't have a filter.
Yeah.
That's just who he is. And
Well,
that's kind of what this is, right?
yeah.
Like
Well, and that's
not
why I
being
want to
able to
say
filter.
that's why I use I think the word broken is important because I find I notice the red flags, right? I know they're
Yeah.
there. And I can think, like, be cognitively aware and present that something I'm about to say should not be said. But by the time that signal gets to my mouth, the thing has already been said, and the gate closes afterward. And when the gate closes afterward, that's the shame trigger for me, right?
Yeah, right.
That's regret, because now I am seconds after the thing came out of my mouth, I realize I screwed up. I didn't stop soon enough, and I get to feel shame at having done it. And so this is from Joel Nigg, says that people without ADHD have this ability to stop midstream if they recognize a person is not smiling, right? They can adjust, change course. The child with ADHD needs 20 to 30 milliseconds longer warning to correct course, which is an eternity when it comes to behavior control. Yes, it is. And also body stories.
So it makes sense that what I like about this, not necessarily the information, but I hope that it gives people an understanding of what's happening. So if your child says something or you say something, it, at least gives you some awareness of why it's happening. I think that's important.
Well, and what is the trigger to the behavior, right? I talked about the shame response when the gate closes.
Right.
What happens, and I'll speak for myself, what happens when I start feeling that is I stop talking altogether, right?
You shut down.
The all or nothing response.
Absolutely.
So if as soon as if I don't ever feel the shame, I could talk, I could get myself going and talk in my brain all night. But once I do something stupid, I can feel shame about it and stop talking at all and just feel bad.
So I'm glad you said that, because as a parent of a teenager who has ADHD, it actually gives me an insight into what's probably happening with her.
Yeah.
Is, where she might shut down. So I appreciate you saying that, because I think those insights are important for us to understand other people.
What's funny, having these kinds of conversations with my mom after my dad passed away, 6 months ago, we're coming to a new understanding of his undiagnosed ADHD. And this was a huge part of it. The way he would get going as a comedian in public, but that hyperactivity takes over the mouth and he doesn't recall or it doesn't have the shame gate close after he says things. It's just his was broken wide open and was constantly saying, especially as he got older. I mean, he was constantly saying things that otherwise might have been regretted.
All right. So we're going to change gears a little bit and talk about, first, I'm going to talk about how I would approach this with a client, what kinds of questions I would ask. And then we're going to go through some of the challenges and solutions that we found, some ideas for people to take away with and see if this might help you if you are one of these over talkers. So from a coach's perspective, there's, what I'm trying to do is build awareness. And so some of the questions that I would probably ask someone is first of all would be, what makes you think that you talk too much? And get them talking to me about where they might find themselves doing this. And I would also be interested in knowing what people have said to them in the past, because we often come up with our own limiting beliefs without really having evidence. And so I want to know, is this something that you think you do, or is it something that you get asked, or, there's something that is said to you about it? So getting kind of more information around the background around all of it. And also understanding, are there any topics that tend to make you want to talk a lot about, or a lot? And these can be hot topics. So for example, if someone is really passionate about something, or they believe in something really, really strongly, that's going to be a trigger for them to really want to be understood and to be heard.
Right.
And so that could be somewhere where they get locked in that cycle of over talking. Does that make sense?
Well, it does make sense. But since we're having a conversation about ADHD hyperactivity, can I share what just happened to me?
Yes.
You said the words hot topic.
Yes.
And I stopped listening to you for a little bit because I immediately thought of the store Hot Topic. And the store Hot Topic, we have one right down the street. And I got very excited about the store Hot Topic because it reminded me that Hot Topic had some weird stock issues going on a while ago. Did they go private? I should probably think about that some more and think about what happened with Hot Topic. Do you know who should really work at Hot Topic? Oh, my son, he would be great as a clerk at Hot Topic, but not if their business is failing. We should think about that. Like I went, and then you said, does that make sense? Cut to right now. And
I love that.
I went on a journey with Hot Topic, and that kind of happened. So
that's it. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I mean to say is,
I appreciate that.
I'm sure it makes sense, Nikki, because you're smart.
Because I already have a job for my son at Hot Topic. So not only do you make sense, I have solved a really big problem.
Oh my God.
I love it. But you know what? That's what you have to, embrace it.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to just embrace your brain for that. Like there's, that's great. And the thing is that if I was asking you a question and I had lost you, then all you would need to do is just clarify. Can you tell me again what you're asking me, or what, whatever.
Say that again.
Like,
I want to make sure I understand.
Yeah. So that's how you can kind of like backtrack. Like you were being very honest, but most people aren't going to tell other people about where their mind is going.
No,
right?
Of course. And in the podcast, I would have said yes and moved on to another question that is right in here. And actually, the question that I had 5 minutes ago before this whole distraction was, what are the signals that you hear from people that you are coaching when they answer that question? What makes you think you talk too much? I'm curious what the consensus is of signals that people who struggle with over talking are actually taking in, because my hunch is there is a part of that pie graph that doesn't actually get the signals that they're over talking, that can't process those signals, like the read the room signals.
Well, that's exactly right. And so that's why I have to ask those questions.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what they're getting, what they're seeing and what they're not seeing. But the other thing is I'm not in the conversation. So I don't know what the other person is thinking or feeling.
But do they report? Do they say, well, people are looking at me funny, or people start conversations on their own and move away from me, or,
It's never really that concrete.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's important that we ask, like, what that question, like, what have people said to you, or what do you notice? Like, why do you feel this way? Because it's never concrete. It's never this, like, this person, I shouldn't say never, but I don't usually get an example.
Sure.
It's something that they have really taken in as a story that they believe. And, to be fair, they may talk too much. I don't know. So that's why we have to kind of figure out, why do you think it's a problem? And then, maybe let's get specific. And so in coaching, I would really try to get them to make an example. Like, tell me a time where you felt regret afterwards. And if you were able to do that conversation over again, what would you do differently? And, I also think it's important to find out, how much attention have you put on this communication skill? Because one of the things you said earlier, Pete, is you said you have paid attention to it. So if it's something that's bothering you, if it's something that you feel like, gosh, I really want to get better at this because I think it's happening too often, then we need to also kind of figure out, what are you willing to try? And that's that's where the strategies and stuff will come in, where we'll talk about that. But, you got to think about what you're willing to try. But I also want people to think, and I don't know the answer to this, but how will you know if you're talking the right amount in a conversation? Like, what does that even look like?
Right. Yeah. What does that look? One of the resources that we pulled up, the link will be in the show notes. The writer with ADHD had a comment that said, pretend you're a ghost and you're at a seance. Whatever you say will not be listened to. So wait until you are invited to speak, to say something. Like, pretend you really are a ghost. And it's a little bit more gamification than speak when spoken to, which is dismissive. But it's more of the game of, okay, if I practice this skill, if I speak when my name is spoken, then maybe what I have to say will be heard and reflected more attentively, because I'll be invited into the conversation. I actually liked the angle there. I'm not sure I like the implementation. I think there's some risk of social hermiting, but I like the idea of pretending to be a ghost.
So one of the strategies that I saw that is also gamifying it that I thought was actually a really great idea is to think of the conversation like a game of catch. So when you're asked a
Yes.
direct question, it's your ball, like you've caught the ball. So now you get to talk, and then you wait a second and you look at that person, and then you throw them the ball,
Yeah.
and let them talk. And then it kind of goes back and forth. So, okay, now I have the ball. So it's time for me to talk. And I thought that that was really creative because I know that so many ADHDers like that visual. They like having a story, to relate to. And I thought that was great. Like,
Did you ever see,
yeah,
have you ever
you
seen
have the ball now.
Yeah, right. No, I'm taking it right now because I have ADHD. So, have you ever seen the movie Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead?
No, I've never
It-
even heard of it.
It's an alternate perspective version of Hamlet, and it's a comedy. And so you're following these two completely side characters, but they're the protagonists in this. It was a play and then a movie. And in this movie, they play this game of questions on a tennis court, right? And so
Oh,
they actually do make it a literal game where the person loses when they respond to a question with a statement. And that has fueled me in so many awkward situations when I can't figure out what to say. I just, in my head, play this game of questions. When somebody asks a question, I respond with another question, and it becomes a
mm-hmm,
volley, right? And so
mm-hmm,
it takes real practice, but it's a fun way to think about not keeping the ball too long, right? It's like
right.
you will not keep the ball too long if you know that you have to throw it by asking a question. And it's a
Yes, I like
metaphorical
that.
ball. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's the same concept. I think it's
Yes.
great. Yeah, I like that. What else do you like here, Pete, that you found?
Oh, well, I think I've already vomited up my most exciting parts. I think there is we've talked about it before, the idea of taking a break,
Mhm.
of like using the tools that you have to measure your pauses in a
Mhm.
conversation, right? To actually, like, one of the reasons we keep talking if we don't like silence is because we're not aware of time, because we're time blind. And it can be useful to just say, like, look at your watch in your head and watch the second hand go by for 3 seconds and actually use that to notice that your mouth is not moving and celebrate that before you start talking again. Use
Mhm.
some sort of mechanical device, or a count, or tapping your leg so you feel something that isn't your mouth to remind you it's not your turn anymore, or you have monopolized something. It's time to take a break. I
Yeah.
really like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we've talked about, this was around communication on the phone. Do you remember when we talked about the phone
We
in one
did.
of our shows? And one of the tips there, I think, apply here is when you are going to have a conversation, especially if it's going to be a meaningful conversation, like something you have to plan for. So it's not
Mhm.
just spontaneous, like at a party, but it's, with your boss or whatever. To actually do a little bit of pre-work, especially if you think you talk too much. This is, I think, especially relative to the people who are interviewing, like for a new job, is to think about what are the key points that you want to say
Yeah.
and have those in front of you to be sort of your guide, to keep you on task and focused on where you want the conversation to be. So I think there's some value in practicing that and role playing, with other people, and see how you come across and be able to refine that before you actually have the conversation.
Yeah. Right. Right. I think to that end, sometimes when I'm going to a social event, I spend time in the car preparing my stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the idea of going in cold is risky, because I'll tell all the stories, and
Right. All the
uh
things.
yeah, I'll tell all the stories. But if I go in and say, hey, if I say like an hour before, here's where I'm going, here are the kinds of people who are at this event, let me take a minute and talk to myself and talk through the kinds of stories that might be useful in a social situation to get people thinking or laughing or talking amongst themselves. Like, how can I prepare for that? Because I know that on the fly, I'm at risk of embarrassing myself and others. I'm a danger to myself and others.
You're a danger. I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah. I mean, at some point,
But
I might tell the tapeworm story, and that just risks disgusting people.
Yeah. It really is gross. Okay. So moving on.
That's a little Easter egg. Somebody's going to ask for the tapeworm story now, and I'm going to have to tell it at a happy hour.
I know, but
Get
you
ready.
don't need to with me. Yeah.
Patreon.com/the ADHD podcast.
Alrighty then. So as we keep talking about these things, oh, I know what I was going to say. See, my memory is really off today. The practicing with someone you trust, and this goes on to my original question from, when we first started the show, is how do you tell someone that they're talking too much or too fast without offending them?
And let me say, in the chat room, if you're a Patreon member, you could join the live stream chat room. And let me say, nobody has chimed in apart from our own Melissa, who says that I do, in fact, talk too much about me, not about her. And so no one is helping answer this question.
No.
So this is a thing that I think is really important. Is well, I don't know. You go ahead first. I'm going to think about myself first.
Well, no, I just am saying on a personal level, because I may have people in my home that this happens, and I would love to know how to approach it.
Yeah.
So, but I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and I don't want people to get shut down or think that I don't want to hear at all, or that I don't care, because I do. Well,
this is what I think is really important, is that you think first, not about the message you're trying to send, but about what would cause pain, right? And for me, that's always being called out in public, right? Having somebody say something in public, or having some sort of disruptive event happen in the conversation, like being interrupted in a way that is somehow disruptive in order to take me away from the event, right?
Or like being rude, you mean? Or being kind of
rude,
like sarcastic. Or...
Yeah. Now, sometimes that has to happen, and we haven't talked at all about, the effects of substances on overtalking and ADHD, and that, if you've been drinking, you might need to be rudely interrupted. But
that's true. We didn't talk about that, but that was actually brought up in one of the articles that I read, is that like alcohol or drug consumption can definitely increase, how much you're talking and what's being said. And then all of your impulses at that point can be altered. So that makes a big difference.
That's it. And so I think that's really important to make note of. But for me, I'll make it personal. If I am talking too much and somebody that knows me pulls me aside and says, "Hey, you've got a lot going on right now in your brain. You might want to take a breather, take a minute and listen, because there's some other really interesting things going on that you might benefit from hearing." This might be the time to do it, right? Who can be kind of gentle about it. And if I'm presented with that kind of opportunity, that's pretty useful. I sometimes talk to my son that way, who deals with this as well, which is, hey, you've got a lot going on in your brain and your mouth right now, and let's take a minute and see what other people have to say, but never in front of others.
No, and that actually helps me to think about, like, because I have a very fast talker in my home, but I think it allows, what you just said allows me to think, okay, what if I just said, "Hey, I'm not following you,"
Yeah.
Because then it's about me and what I'm not getting, but not on her. Like, I don't want her to feel bad.
Yeah.
But I'm not following it.
And part of it is I'm not following you, and that means there's a chance others aren't.
Right.
And so to make that connection, especially if you're new to being, adjusted like that in the moment. Yeah.
And I can tell you, okay, this actually just came up to me too with coaching groups. So one of the things about being a a leader in a coaching group, which I'm leading, right? I'm guiding, is I do have to sometimes pull people out of the conversation that they're in so that we can get back onto the topic. And I try to do that very delicately so that it doesn't offend anyone. And so what I will do when I have to is I will have to interrupt them and say, okay, I, get where you're going, and maybe we can talk about this in between our sessions. We use Discord for communication, give them another option, but try to, get them to kind of come back. And a lot of times people really appreciate it. I don't think I've ever had anybody that's really been offended by it. So now that we're talking about it, I can kind of see where in my own personal world where I've had to do that to kind of keep things on track. And other people tend to appreciate it too, because they may be noticing that what's supposed to be a topic is getting completely washed because we're talking about something that's not that topic. Yeah, it's delicate. I mean, it's hard because we all have the tendency to do it, but it's very difficult to hear that you're doing it.
Yeah, it is. And question from the chat room. How do you circumvent an overtalker in a group setting where the talker is monopolizing a conversation that is supposed to be time for everyone? I think that's
exactly what I'm talking about.
Question.
Yeah, it's exactly. It is so true, and it is so hard, especially as a group monitor or whatever leader. But especially when you're with ADHDers, because everybody wants to talk, or you get those that don't want to talk, but we want them into the conversation. So it's also my job to kind of focus on them too.
Right.
And give them an opportunity to talk. And it's tricky for sure. It's just interesting because I'm thinking about if you're that person and you're feeling like you're talking too much, what are some other things that you can do? And I think that awareness piece is just so important, that you pause for a moment, even if it's just for a second. And think about, what do I really want to say? And something else that came to my mind that helps me is I don't have to keep repeating the same thing. If they have a question, they'll ask.
Yes.
So I try not to repeat things, but I still do. I know I do in this show. So people, I'm sure, will be able to get recordings that say, well, Nikki, you repeated this 3 times. Well, of course I did.
Well, and what's funny is I have the luxury of being able to look at the sound form, the waveform of both of us on this show and see how much people talk in relation with a guest too, depending on the guest. It's really interesting to look at those patterns. I think this goes back to practice, and you have a section in the outline you want to talk about challenges and homework, and I feel like this is a good time to just review some ideas for things we can do to keep these things mindful for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that, again, it goes back to awareness. So role playing with someone that you trust before important conversations. If there's somebody in your life, like a partner or a sibling or your daughter or son, or, anybody that you're living with that you trust, practicing with them and having an agreement that when you are talking, if you notice that's, you are talking too much or too fast, having some kind of signal or having some kind of agreement up front of what to do when this happens. So you're not calling them on it. Like, it's not going to be a surprise. We've talked about outlining what you want to say before you go into like an important conversation. I also think it's important to, after the fact, because a lot of times you're not going to notice these things until after you're sitting there and thinking about it. But think about how or what happened to your body when you were talking too much. It's probably some kind of excitement, or maybe you're frustrated. But if you can kind of start to understand your signals, it also can give you that pause button that, oh, wait, this is like stirring up emotion here. So before I say anything, I need to kind of pause. So we've talked about a lot of different things, slowing down, this whole gamification. I love the ball passing back and forth. I think it's a great way to practice. So my challenge, go ahead.
I just have one more thing I want to add
Yeah.
before your challenge. And I think we have actually an interesting opportunity when you look at our, in our community and the multiple times we have to get members of the community together, voice to voice and face to face. The opportunity to think, and probably this is because I think in terms of like scatter charts and connected diagrams, right? And so, I'll have a conversation topic in mind, and there will be 5 other things that I could talk about that are loosely related, and then another level out, and they're not related at all. And what my brain wants to do is follow the chains, like the hot topic chain, right? Suddenly we're talking about the stock market and my son's summer job. The act of practicing going into one of these social engagements and saying to myself, what is the most important thing that I need to say, and practice finding awareness in where you've jumped to a new topic. Sometimes that's so fluid you can't even see it. But if you practice thinking about, I'm making a connection here that is loosely and increasingly less related to the topic that I started with, that's what you practice every day. That's what you practice in conversations. And I was thinking about happy hour, at the in our Patreon group, we have this face-to-face happy hour. Like, what a great opportunity to practice, because one thing we do every time is give us the life update. What's going on in your life? Maybe that's a way to practice for those who are members to come in and think, okay, what is the most important thing that I haven't talked about since last month, so that I don't monopolize the conversation, because we all ask questions. And before you know it, an hour has gone by and we've just focused on one person, which is sometimes great and organic and awesome. But if you come with something else you want to talk about, sometimes it's hard.
Right.
So, practice.
Well, absolutely. Practice. And, something else that I want to add, and I think it's really important, is that we separate the ADHD symptom from who you are as a person. And so when that shame comes up, I really want people to think, okay, that was the ADHD that got Pete thinking about the hot topic.
Yeah.
Like, that's not Pete being rude or Pete not caring about what I have to say, or, that's just Pete doing his thing. And you have to, like, as a person, be okay with that. Like, it is what it is, and not try your hardest not to get down in that shame spiral, because it's just part of how you're thinking. And none of these tips are going to make it go away completely, right? This is not a cure all to this thing. It's stuff to practice, exactly what Pete is saying. And sometimes you're going to get it right, and sometimes you're not. And I'm just asking you that you see that as being just an ADHD symptom. It's just, it got in your way that day, and be able to recover from that.
We do. We run into a lot of people in the community who have a lot of shame around this trait that they know they have and they fight dealing with. But I with you, I don't necessarily think you want to strive to get rid of it. I think you want to be aware of it. It makes you who you are in many wonderful circumstances.
Well, and it can make you so creative and exciting. I mean, absolutely. So my kind of homework for people listening to this, I know we've talked a lot. You're probably going to have to look at the transcript, but what are some things that you want to try and practice and pay attention to? And please let us know, as a person with ADHD, how would you want to be told from someone that maybe this is something to work on without being offended? And I would love to know what you have to say. And once we have some responses, we'll share those. We'll come back to the show and share what people have to say, because I think, with someone who doesn't have ADHD but lives with people with ADHD, I want to know what you have to say. This is really important. I want to know. So please help me, because this is not in the research.
Right. This is awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you, Pete.
Great.
Right?
Thank you for allowing me my own little tour of my brain. And thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us. If you have something to contribute to the conversation, we're heading over to the Show Talk channel in the Discord server. You can join us right there by becoming a supporting member at the deluxe level. And it also gets you access to the live stream, which is really, really great. That's where good stuff happens. And we've had such a wonderful, energetic group today. It's fun to reflect on that. But thank you all for your time and attention. On behalf of Nikki Kinzer, I'm Pete Wright, and we'll see you right back here next week on Taking Control, the ADHD podcast.